Josh Pickel grew up in Canton, Illinois, and returned home to teach at the public schools he had once attended, first as an elementary school teacher and then as a middle school science teacher. It was what he had always wanted, and yet he was feeling increasingly unsettled about the coercive classroom dynamics characteristic of conventional schooling. So Josh began researching alternative education models and came across Liberated Learners, a network of self-directed learning centers for teens modeled after North Star, a learning center in Western Massachusetts that was started in 1996 by Ken Danford, who was also a former public middle school teacher. And Ken has also been on this podcast. He's a real pioneer in alternative education and self-directed learning. So Josh connected with Ken, and last summer he quit his teaching job to open Canton Learning Collaborative, a self-directed microschool for homeschoolers. It tripled really. It grew from 5 learners last fall to 15 learners throughout the course of the year, most of them planning to return again this fall. So thrilled for your success, and welcome to the Liberated Podcast, Josh.
Thanks, Carrie. Thank you for having me.
I was just saying to you before we started recording that it was a year ago, I think almost to the day, that we first connected, and I interviewed you for a Forbes article I was writing for back to school time about the kind of variety of schooling alternatives that are increasingly available to parents, and you being one of those education entrepreneurs who's creating these schooling alternatives. So I'd love to get more of your story, particularly kind of going back to, you had essentially, from what I recall of our conversation last year, you had your dream job. You were back kind of working as a public school teacher in the schools that you grew up in, that you enjoyed. Kind of what were your expectations going into your teaching position? And then at what point did you realize, something's amiss here?
Yeah. I'm going to maybe go back even a little bit further to my
Sure.
teaching experience. Was like, so in my mid 20s, I started teaching. I had when I first left college, I had a couple jobs as like a substitute, and it was hard to get a job as a teacher at that time. I was applying and there was a ton of applicants for every position. And then I finally found one. I wanted to teach middle school. And then I got a job teaching fifth grade first in a town near where I live. And I didn't really enjoy it. Actually, I got that job the day before school started. And so I was kind of really thrown into it. And then it wasn't the grade level I wanted to teach. And I just wound up having like kind of a negative experience with teaching. And then they had gotten a grant to hire me, and the grant ran out. So I had to find a new job, and I found a job teaching 4th grade. Again, not really the grade level I wanted, and had another negative experience. And at that point, I quit teaching for 7 years, until I was into my early 30s, I think. And a friend of a friend recommended to the director of an adult learning, like a GED program, recommended me to that person, and he reached out to me, and I wound up coming back into the classroom to teach GED classes. And that kind of, the bug bit me again, as you'd say. And so I did that for a year. And I was working for the electric company in the town where I live, and teaching GED classes a couple nights a week. And the position I had at the electric company was being phased out. And so I was looking for a new job again. And I had filled out like half of an online application for the middle school here in my town to teach social studies, actually, I think. And I only filled out half of the application. I was like, I don't want to be a teacher. I had in my mind, like, I'll do the GED classes, but I don't want to teach public school anymore. And then the principal of the school, I didn't even know they could see my application, but the principal of the school called me and was like, hey, are you going to finish this application? And I was like, I need a job, I guess. And so the next day I had an interview, and then the next, that was on a Friday, I think. And then Monday they hired me to teach science, the 7th grade science, the following year. And then they also that was actually spring 2020. So then they brought me in to teach, to do a long-term sub position, teaching like a class called study skills. that's like across grade levels, you take it for a quarter, that sort of thing. And so I started that long-term sub position in March, and then school immediately shut down. So I was in the school building for one day, and then I taught online the rest of the quarter, that study skills class, and then started teaching seventh grade science the following year online again. Most of that first year was online. So, it was just completely different than anything I'd done really. But I didn't mind that so much, because there was a lot of freedom in it. The kids had freedom too because they were at home. And then they came back to school, and I did the whole next year with kids in the building, regular situation. And so like my educational experience had been, I was disillusioned from it, and then I came back and I was enjoying it. But then like when I was in that second year, really was when I started to like, my wheels started turning about like things that were amiss in this situation. Like I wasn't really enjoying the way I was being expected to work with kids. What one teacher once told me, just close your door and and do whatever you think is right, which is what I did a lot of the time. But a lot of things I was doing, were kind of against the typical expectations of like a traditional school situation. Like I wasn't, if a kid says they have to go to the bathroom, I was not like regularly signing their book so they could leave the room and that sort of stuff. Just like, do you have to go to the bathroom? Yes, go. And some of that stuff was coming back on me, like when other teachers were finding out that I wasn't like following the bathroom rules or like letting kids have snacks in my room and stuff. And it was just like, why are those things a problem? Like why can't a kid go to the bathroom when their body says they need to go to the bathroom? And if they're hungry, why can't they have a snack and things like that? And it just, there were these rules that I was expected to follow that felt like I was being made to take rights away from kids when they were in the building. And I just didn't sit right with me. I'm not into like hierarchical power structures very much. So being a teacher in a classroom, it's sort of like built into that. And I didn't really enjoy that. So um that was one piece of it. And then another piece of it was like, stop me if I'm rambling too much, but
No,
um
please go on. This is great.
okay. And there was another piece of it that was like, I was seeing kids who were clearly like bright and capable kids just being completely disinterested in not just my class, but school in general. They were doing things, they weren't trying to like do the best they could. It was more like they're working for a grade and they'll do the bare minimum that they have to do to get, maybe they want an A, or if they're fine with a C, or, some kids just want to pass. And I knew they could do better, but they didn't have interest in that. And, I always say like I was teaching chemistry to 80 12-year-olds. And how many 12-year-olds are like deeply interested in chemistry and like want to like really dig into it, not very many. So I was just like, why do they have to learn chemistry right now? Like, why can't we wait until they want to learn it? Because, when you're motivated to learn something, or you have context to learn it or a reason to learn it, better learning happens. So I was noticing like, yeah, like, so these kids were disinterested in school, but they had these like deep interests that they were really, they'd get jazzed about. And so, and building relationships is always like the number one thing for me in teaching, because I think foundationally like that has to happen before like deep learning can happen. So I would get interested in their interests and, hey, have you ever thought about that? I'd give them ideas and things like that, and just be interested in the things that they cared about. And you can see kids like get excited about, they get excited about the stuff they care about, and they don't care so much about my chemistry class. So um it's like, as an example, there's a story that I have that I tell sometimes about this one kid in particular. Was he like really solidified this for me? He had this reputation of kind of being lazy and unmotivated, and didn't care about school and that sort of stuff, but he was like very clearly smart. And so he was in my study hall, and I was teaching science, but I also had a study hall, and so there was a requirement for the kids' math class that they complete one lesson on this computer based, kind of math program every week. They had to, by Friday, they had to complete one. And so this day in study hall was supposed to be dedicated to completing that. And so this kid came in and he wanted to be a mechanical engineer, but he had this reputation of not being very motivated. But when he walked in my door that day, he had his computer open and he was watching a Harvard lecture on mechanical engineering. And the expectation that is, not my expectation, the expectation placed on me is that I tell him to shut off the Harvard lecture and do this math program, which he hates. And that seemed crazy. I was like, here he is, like clearly learning something that he's very interested in that will benefit him. And I'm supposed to have him turn it off so he can like click around on, just basically click through this math program till he gets to the end so that he can fulfill some requirement somebody else says he has to do. And I felt I was just like, no, I'm not going to make him do that. And then another time, this same kid came in and he had like a bag of like gems, crystals, rock, whatever you want to say, lots of different types. And, I think the expectation probably would have been that I'm supposed to just tell him to turn right around and go put it back in his locker. But I didn't do that. I wanted to see what would happen. He came in and he like kind of dumped them out on his desk and he was looking at them and, talking about them to himself or whoever would listen. And he kind of gathered a little crowd of my study hall around his desk. And people are asking him questions about it. And he's telling them all these things about all these rocks. And again, he's supposed to put the rocks away and work on this math thing. But, there he was teaching other kids about this thing that he had interest in, that they were taking interest in. And it was so like such an organic, like learning moment for those kids that I stopped the class and I put him in front of the class and I gave him a document camera so he could like show the rocks on the big screen behind him. And he held a class, like basically held a class for the 30 minutes on this thing, And so there was this kid that was like, had this reputation of being lazy and unmotivated, but, obviously when he has interest, he's, can do he can do anything. It seemed like, like as long as he's interested. And so I think about that kid a lot because he kind of showed me that, if you're not typically a typical good student, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. So he was instrumental in like shifting my mindset on what kids could do and what kids needed to do. And I started to think, I was starting to think about things like, why is it important that we teach them chemistry now? Or why is it important that they learn, why is it important that they read this book at this time? And if they don't want to, like all of that sort of stuff. So
Josh, I just want to interrupt briefly and just
Yeah,
say, because
please.
there's just so much there already. And then I want to get into again, how you
Yeah.
kind of found self-directed education and opened
Yeah.
Canton learning. But I guess I want to start with what makes you so special, right? I mean, there's obviously wonderful teachers in the conventional system.
Yeah.
But what is it about you that like it bothered you that kids didn't have the freedom of mobility? Like it was bothersome to you that you had to give them a hall pass to use the bathroom, or that, they're hungry, why don't we let them eat? And it seems like whether it's the system or the ways in which other teachers become conditioned in the system, many of them, that doesn't seem problematic. And yet it did to you in the same way that it was problematic to you that as a kid, very curious about engineering, watching on his own, by his own agency, a video about this. And then the expectation is that you're supposed to shut that learning down. I guess, what makes you so special?
Well, thanks. I don't know. I've kind of thought about that, like, because I went to regular school and I was a good student, but like I got pretty much straight A's, I think, through most of high school. I think I got a few B. Anyway, I was a good student, but I was a good student who like also caused trouble, but not, I don't know. I like to think of it as like good trouble, if that's such a thing. I would cause, I was thinking about this earlier because for somehow I anticipated a question like this. Um, but trouble that I would cause when I was younger was like trouble that, um, what's the word I want to use? Like not attacked, but challenged power structures. I don't know. I've always been like a question authority, challenge power structures sort of person. I think I got into like punk rock at an early age when I was probably, I don't know, 13 or 14. And so that's like those sorts of values are something that's kind of deeply ingrained in that sort of ideology. And so, I was learning, just because somebody who's um from the outside looks is supposed to be above you, says you're supposed to do something, doesn't mean you have to do it. And so, and you should ask why. You should always ask, why do I have to do that, or why do I need to know this, or why are you making me do something I don't want to do? And so that's part of it, I think. And I had a lot of freedom as a kid. My parent, it was just by nature of what it was. My parents worked a lot, and so I was like a latchkey kid, and I was kind of out in the world just like doing things that I wanted to do, and not really like, it wasn't like unsavory acts that I was doing, but it was, I was like outside all the time. And there was a big group of my friends that lived around the block, and we were just like free to do what we wanted. And so I have this idea that like I had freedom when I was a kid for the most part, and I don't see why other kids shouldn't have that. And I don't know. I don't like holding power over other people. I think that's a weird thing to want. And I don't know. If you're in a public school setting for any length of time, like you're going to see teachers and other adults who like seem to take pleasure in that sort of power dynamic. And that always rubbed me the wrong way. So it's just kind of this like, I don't know, maybe I guess the way I was brought up, or the way, the things I was into when I was young kind of placed this foundation of that sort of stuff for me.
Yeah, so that was the foundation for you to realize like this doesn't have to be this way, or maybe it shouldn't be this way. And then you see these examples of young people who are able to pursue their interests and be really excited about learning. I know when we talked previously, you also mentioned that you were running an after-school digital media club where
Yeah.
kids were really free to pursue their own interests. And it was like night and day in terms of their enthusiasm for learning. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about
Mhm.
that experience.
Yeah. So there was a room, or there is a room at the school I was working at. They call it the Imagination Station, and it's just like it's when I went, it's the same school I went to when I was in middle school, but when I went there, it was just a large classroom. But now it's got like, there's a 3D printer, and there's all this audio equipment and virtual reality stuff and a green screen and video equipment and iPads and all these things. And it just wasn't really being utilized very much. Um, and so I wanted to provide kids the opportunity to use that stuff. It was all just sitting there. So like, why can't we use that? And so, but I wanted to do it in a way that was like, I didn't want to, okay, I didn't want to give kids an assignment that they had to, okay, you've got to make this, and this, and it's got to be, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to just let them explore it, find something they might enjoy, that sort of thing. So I started this, what we call digital media club, and it was pretty popular. I think we had like 30 kids probably from across grade levels, I think sixth through eighth grade. And so we would go in there, I think twice a week for a couple hours, and I just let them do whatever they wanted, basically, within reason. They couldn't break the equipment and stuff like that. But um, and you know, I wrote down, some of the things, like it was really impressive. Like they designed and printed t-shirts, and they made music, and they made videos, and they explored virtual reality, and they coded little robots, and they made it really impressive works of art with Apple pens on an iPad, and they did, one girl wrote a book. They did all kinds of stuff, and I didn't tell them to do any of it. I was just like, here you go, here's the tools, what do you want to do? And along with like having the freedom to just explore all of that stuff and create all of that stuff, like the group of kids that we had gotten together was, I mean, a lot of them were socially, whatever, not the popular kids, or just socially different sorts of kids. And But you could see them shining like in that space. I think they had the freedom to be themselves in a school setting, like a lot more than they were usually used to. And it was just, and without realizing it at the time, because I didn't know anything about, what I would wind up doing, but really that was like the prototype and the first iteration of what Canton Learning Collaborative would become, was, this free space where kids are able to be who they are and play with the tools of the culture and find things that excite them.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. So then what happened next? You have kind of all of these foundational experiences, and that at what
Yeah.
point did you start looking into alternative education, self-directed education? What was that path like?
Yeah. I've always had like an interest in education reform. Just because, even when I was in college studying education, there were alarm bells where I was like, well, that doesn't seem right. And so, when you're that sort of person, you become a teacher, you think you're gonna like, all right, I'm gonna go in there and I'm gonna change everything. And then once you get into it, you quickly realize like this is too big for me to change on my own. And there's not enough of us here that think this same way to be able to change it here. So um I started to, I was thinking about like, so how can we, there's some questions like I was asking myself, like, is there any reason that specific material has to be taught at certain ages? And I'm thinking about like content standards and stuff, and like, no, that doesn't really seem like that needs to happen. And how can we make kids just want to do their best rather than work toward a grade? And so, these sorts of questions I was asking myself. I started looking into like ungrading. I had developed a plan to completely remove grading from my classroom. And then I was told by one administrator that I couldn't do it. And so then I started looking into a bunch of other stuff. I was just clicking around, thinking, how can we basically trying to learn and read more about giving kids freedom and autonomy within the classroom. How can I let them do what they want to do within this framework of like having to learn this set of standards? How can I give them as much agency as possible? And I came across like democratic schooling and Sudbury's and things like that. And I bought a book called Starting a Sudbury School. It's I think Daniel Greenberg's book, Starting a Sudbury School. And so I bought that, not really thinking I would ever, like, oh, maybe in 10 years I'll do something crazy. But um and so then I started looking into, reading that book and looking into like Illinois state requirements for how to start your own school and things. And it's just like, what a process that is to start a school. And so then I came across Joel Hammond's TED Talk about don't start a school, start a self-directed learning center. And he was a middle school teacher who had some of the, like a lot of the same stuff that I was feeling, and it was just like, wow, I really identify with this guy and the things he's saying. And I went to the Princeton Learning Cooperative website, and then I found North Star, and I found Liberated Learners. And before I met any of those guys, I basically just like started taking Princeton Learning Cooperative and North Star ideas and like sketching out an idea of what this would look like if I was going to do it. And then Liberated Learners does a webinar once or twice a month where they'll like explain to you how they do it and what they do. And so I did that webinar and I met Ken. And at the end, it was questions. And I was like, hey, Ken, here's what I've done so far. What else do I need to do? And he was like, that's a trick. He said, that's a trick question. You're already doing it. And I was like, oh, okay. That makes sense. And so then I was like, so I had this like framework that I took from Liberated Learner, the stuff North Star and PLC were doing. And um, yeah, so I hadn't quit my job yet. This was like May. And so then school ended and I started putting, I had this plan and I was going to run it as like, I was going to keep my job and try to do like a pilot program with one or two kids after school during the next year. That meant that in order to do that, I was going to have to quit teaching the GED classes that I taught in the evening. And I was going to do that. But then I got to thinking like, if these kids are going to be out of school, out of system, then they're going to, if they want a high school credential, they're going to need to take a GED class. So it seemed like the GED job that I had was more in line with like what this self-directed learning center would be. So I was like, I guess I should just quit my day job, keep the GED thing because it works so well together. And at least I can still pay my bills or I won't lose my house if I do this. So I just, in July, I called Ken and I said, what do you think? If you think I can just go full time now? And he was like, are you going to lose your house if you do that? And I said, no. He said, okay, let's do it. And so we just like, they
Wow.
have like an accelerator program. Liberated Learners does a program where they'll help you like, set up all your things. And I was halfway there. And so usually that process is a lot longer. But I had all this stuff already and I had this relationship with Ken, and he just like, he really mentored me, and like, I still keep contact with him obviously, but between July and September when we started, it was just like, all right, we're doing it. And we started doing it.
Wow.
And
That's
my
amazing.
building, I was looking everywhere for a building. I had all
Mm.
this stuff and we didn't have a building. And so I have a friend who has a donation based yoga studio in my town. And he was like, why don't you just use my space during the day? And I said, okay, let's do that. And so we started in September in this yoga studio while my building was getting finished because it was being completely remodeled by the person who owned it. And then in November we moved into our building, and it's just, we've been off to the races. So
Oh, just
it was
so
like,
exciting.
it really happened fast.
Really
Yeah.
amazing. And starting with five learners in the fall of 2022 and tripling over the course of the year. Tell us a little bit more, Josh, about the Liberated Learners model, how you kind of operate Canton Learning. Yeah, tell us a little bit more about the structure there.
Yeah. So it's entirely based on self-directed learning. Like and unschooling, is a word that a lot of people use, which I think is a very self-directed learning and unschooling are very similar. There's maybe some little differences depending on how you look at it. Everybody has a different idea of what they are. But so, I mean, and it's interesting because the other part of this is that like I was a public school teacher in May and then like shifted into this whole thing. So the whole first year, I was really still deschooling myself and trying to figure out like, it was hard to like give up some of that control. Like I don't know, because I don't like that power structure thing, but it was so built into what I had to do that it was like part of me somehow that I didn't and I had to let it go. And so over the year, I was trying to do that, and it was very experimental in the first year. Like we're trying lots of different things. I'm trying to figure out like what does this look like in practice? Like I know all the ideas behind it, but how does it manifest in real life? And so we were trying lots of different things, and I don't know. So I'm trying to like make it easier on myself a little bit this year because I think I'm mostly deschooled now. And
Well done. It only
yeah,
took a year. That's great.
right. And so yeah, what I think they say, like it takes a year for every year of school that you've been in or something.
Right, right,
So
right.
I shouldn't be deschooled all the way until I'm elderly. But um, so this year I'm just kind of thinking about like I'm just gonna really like lean on those optimizing conditions, Peter Gray's 6 optimizing conditions, and just like that's how we run this place. Those are the 6 things that we care about, and that's kind of what it is. I don't know.
Yeah, and so
It's
it's sort of the focus on the idea that young people are naturally curious, and if we
yeah,
just allow them to explore their interests and discover their passions, they will do so joyfully. They don't need to be
mhm,
coerced or cajoled into doing that. And I know the
right,
Liberated Learners model typically runs as more of like a homeschool resource center where the students are
yeah,
kind of legally
yeah,
recognized as homeschoolers, but they can come to a program like Canton Learning several days a week and take classes
Mhm.
if they choose, but everything is optional and voluntary. There's
Right.
mentoring and kind of advising if young people want that. So is that what you're finding, that you're just modeling your
Yeah.
program after that?
Yeah. So everybody that comes to CLC is a homeschooler. When we started with 5 kids, all 5 of those kids were previously homeschooled. And then over the course of the year, we added 10 more who left the public school system, declared as homeschoolers, came to us.
Why were
Um,
they, I don't mean to interrupt already, but why were they
sure.
leaving? Do
Yeah.
you know? Was there kind of a common theme?
Seemed like mental health was a big part of
Mm,
it. Just like massive anxiety at school. School is a place where like you can't always go to the bathroom when you need to, and that makes you anxious. And it's just like you can't escape people. The only place to escape everyone is to go to the bathroom, and you can't always do that. And so, just
mm.
I think mental health was a big piece of it. Anxiety for a lot of kids, school refusal, those sorts of things.
They heard about Canton Learning and said, this is the answer that I've been looking for. I guess, how did they find
Yeah.
their way to you?
Yeah. So the first girl who came to us from public school was her mom was somebody that my wife had worked with in the past, and she had done my wedding photos. And so she kind of knew us a little bit. And her daughter was having some of those problems with, anxiety and bullying and just those sorts of things. And she's just like a free spirit sort of kid. And so they came in and talked to me about, what is this all about? What is this thing? And I explained it to them, and they were like, yeah, that sounds great. So she came in. She was the first kid to come from public school, and then honestly, from stemming from her, it was like one of her friends, and then 2 of their friends, and then it was like, so we have this group of like 5 or 6 kids who were all friends previously in school, and then they were all like, yeah, that is way better, and so they all came to us that way, and so that's how we gained a bunch was um they all came from the same grade level, and so I don't know what was going on that maybe pushed them out of there, but it was all similar stuff for those kids.
Wow.
um yeah.
And so, and it's mostly for tweens and teens. That tends to be the liberated
Right.
learners model, although it doesn't have to
Yeah.
always look that way, but that tends to be how it plays out. And so as you sort of go into this next year, what is your sense of enrollment? I mean, are you going to triple again over the course of the year, do you think?
That would be wonderful.
Yeah.
So we had 15 at our highest point, and then we had a couple kids who decided it wasn't for them, and they went back to school, or one of them was a homeschooler who has is neurodivergent and decided that it wasn't the right space for her, and decided to do something else. And then we have a couple kids who were 14 and 15 when they came to us, turned 15 and 16. So they're 15 and 16 now. They're leaving to start community college. One of them, so the 16-year-old girl is spent the last year with us, and now she's starting a culinary program full time. And then another young man who's 15 is starting to take community college classes, and he's going to come back and actually teach a class, I think, for us this year. And then, so I think we're looking at like 10 probably to start the year. And then, every week we're fielding, you know, questions and people interested in the program. And so, um, yeah, I mean, the growth has been really steady. And I think this summer we did some good things to kind of get our name out into the community a little more, and people are starting to understand kind of what it is and what we do. And there were no other alternative education options where I live until I opened Canton Learning Collaborative, and so it's really, this sort of thing is very new to people around here. And so, it was just the first year of it, so I think there was a lot of wait and see from a lot of people and that sort of stuff. And so I'm expecting enrollment to continue to grow steadily. Yeah.
And one of the things about these learning centers, like the liberated learners model and microschools more generally, is that they tend to be low cost education
Mhm.
options, often a fraction of the cost of traditional private schools, particularly
Right.
traditional secular private schools. Is that what you're seeing as well? I guess how are you managing the fee structure?
Yeah, so we have just a really similar to like how North Star does, like a sliding fee or a sliding schedule for membership fees, based on how often you plan to be there and all that sort of stuff. And then, like North Star, part of my goal is to be able to offer this opportunity to anybody who wants it. And so if you can't afford those suggested fees, then tell me a number that works for you, and I'll accept it. Um, we're a uh, nonprofit education center, so we're looking we're starting. We didn't do a ton of fundraising last year, really. I got a Vela grant, a micro grant from Vela to kind of to get the doors open, basically. And then, now this summer we've been spending time on figuring out some fundraising stuff and that sort of thing. So um to kind of continue the operations. But yeah, so we have that sliding fee schedule, and those are suggestions, and I want anybody who wants to come to come. So that's the way we do it.
Yeah, and you
Uh,
mentioned kind of in the beginning, Josh, as you were starting to look at your entrepreneurial journey, you looked at what it would
sure.
take to open a private school in Illinois, and ultimately didn't want to go through that process. What do you think it is about the sort of microschool or homeschool learning center model that you find more attractive than operating a traditional private school or a private school of any sort?
Yeah. I enjoy that it's like completely out of system, permissionless. I don't want to have to give tests, standardized tests, or any of that sort of stuff. I don't want to have to ask anybody before we do something. I don't want to have to have a requirement that we have to do something. I just want it to remain as free as possible. Like, I'm trying to create a place that's like a place where kids can be free to be themselves and free to find and develop their passions into like a viable career path. And I don't want anything to encumber that. So in terms of like government funding and anything that got like something tied to it that I have to do, I don't want that. I want it. It's about the same way it's about autonomy for the kids. I want it to remain completely like, I don't want to have to answer to anyone else, and I don't want the kids to have to do that either.
Yeah, I hear you. So you're a year into your journey as an education entrepreneur. Your deschooling process is complete. And I
Maybe.
wonder, at least for now, I
Yeah.
wonder, looking back on this first year, what advice would you give to someone else listening who's sort of recognizes themselves in your story, right? They recognize that
Yeah.
they're not happy in the conventional system. They want to take a leap into something new. What advice would you say to them now, looking back on that?
Wow, what advice? I just kind of did it. I went for it, and that, I don't know. That's hard to do. It was hard to do. It's still hard to do. Like, I have two other jobs so that I can do this. Like, so I teach GED classes and I work in a restaurant kitchen a couple nights a week so that I can like still pay the bills, because I haven't replaced my teaching salary yet. So it's like, it's really super hard to do what I'm doing. But um, I think if you are the type of teacher I was, who values relationships and values the kids' freedom and their rights and their autonomy and all of that sort of stuff, I think you have to really take a hard look at like what you're doing in the school that liberates the kids rather than keeps them in boxes. And I think if you can, if you have the ability to do something like this, or if you have the desire to do something like this, maybe find a couple other teachers in your building who are the same way, and give something like this a chance, try it out. Um, Liberated Learners uh, was a huge help in that. And then just being remaining a member of Liberated Learners and having that community of people who are facing a lot of the same challenges I am is really valuable to me. Um, so, and I think if you're like looking for a push, like watch Joel's TED Talk. And if you're not ready to like run out the front door and start a self-directed learning center, then I think it's probably not for you. But like, I don't know. It was that TED Talk was like, yep, that's the way I want to do, that's how I want to work with kids. So,
I'll put both Joel's
yeah,
and Ken's TED Talks in the show notes,
yeah,
as well as the link to
yeah,
Liberated Learners. So, okay, so my listeners and viewers might be saying, yes, I can jump right in. I have this vision. I want to do this. But then they might be hearing you say you work 2 other jobs on the side because you're kind of not
yeah,
financially sustainable yet. What
yeah.
is your pathway to financial sustainability? Do you see that pathway? What is it going to take?
So I think if if we can get the numbers up, if we get the numbers up on, to 25 kids, 30 kids, then I think we should be pretty set. Um, but I keep watching these education savings accounts things really closely as well. I don't know how fast Illinois is going to jump on that bandwagon, but that's something that I'm paying attention to because if everybody who wants to come to Canton Learning Collaborative has some amount of money that they're able to spend on education, then that would keep us afloat. So I'm paying attention to that. Obviously, like I'm not I'm not into it for the money. Like I don't mind having these other jobs. They're jobs that I like, so it just takes up time. But um, what was I gonna say? Yeah, I think we just if we keep doing what we're doing and the numbers and our enrollment keeps growing steadily like it is, then I think we should hit a number that is viable and stable for us to at least continue to survive. And um, organizations like Vela are doing a lot. They help, without that micro grant last year, I probably wouldn't have been able to do this. And I applied this year for another one or another for the next step and that sort of stuff. But and so if there's more organizations like that willing to help us out and things like education savings accounts and our numbers going up and all of that sort of stuff, I can see it. And these sorts of things, these sorts of micro schools, self-directed, there's a moment happening right now,
Mhm.
so it's like, I don't see it going anywhere. So I really feel like I got into it a little bit early, especially for where I'm at. Like nobody's doing what I'm doing really. And so I think that we should have a path forward. Um, and I'm remaining hopeful about that. So
And what do you think about the conventional schooling system, Josh? Where do you think that goes? Do they eventually become competitive and realize that parents want these more learner-centered alternatives? I guess, what is your expectation of the conventional system?
yeah, I don't know because the sort of thing that we're doing doesn't seem possible in a building that has 800 students or that's how big my building was, but there's a lot that are even bigger. So I don't know. I mean, it seems to me like you could almost house 20 micro schools within one school building, but I'm not sure how fast something like that is going to happen, but it seems like a reasonable thing to happen. I don't know. But I expect conventional education to get to go that way or get that way? No, I don't. But um, I think traditional conventional schooling as it is will continue to exist, and that's fine. That's good. It works just fine for a lot of kids, and it works fine for a lot of teachers, and families are happy with it when they're happy with it, and that's wonderful. I think there should just be all sorts of options. I mean, the way I do it is one way, and there's lots of other ways. Conventional schooling is one of those, and I don't see it going away. I don't see them like changing to a model that's more like mine. I think they'll probably continue to do things the way they're doing them, and you'll just continue to see like smaller alternatives pop up around that.
And if parents are interested in the Canton Learning Collaborative and or interested listeners want to hear more about your experience, what is the best way for them to connect with you?
You can go to our website. It's www.cantonlearning.org. You can email me. I'm josh@cantonlearning.org. You can find me on Twitter. I think it's at JoshCLC. Any of those ways, I'm available. So,
well, I'm wishing you such wonderful luck and joy over the next academic year. And Josh Pickel, thank you so much for being on the Liberated podcast.
yeah, thank you, Carrie, for having me on. I had a good time.